It started with a silence that felt heavier than words. The kind of silence that only comes before a storm. Cameras were flashing, royal watchers were whispering, and somewhere behind closed palace doors, a decision was about to be made. One that would change everything. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Prince William, the man once known for his quiet restraint, was about to make the boldest move of his life. You could almost feel the tension rippling through London. Social media had already caught wind of the rumor. Something big was happening inside Buckingham Palace, but no one could have imagined just how personal it was. This wasn't just about royal protocol or public image. This was about betrayal, loyalty, and the breaking point of a future king. For years, William had stayed silent. Through interviews, accusations, and Netflix documentaries, he had remained the calm, dutiful prince, never responding, never reacting. But patience has limits, even for a man raised to embody control. And now, faced with what he saw as the final insult to the crown, William decided to act. Have you ever seen someone pushed past their limit? That's where this story begins. The British public woke up to chaos. Headlines screamed across every newspaper. Prince William demands stripping of Meghan's royal titles. The story seemed too wild to be true, too shocking, too direct. But this time, the words didn't come from unnamed palace insiders or gossip columns. They came from William himself. Meghan Markle is no longer royal. That's what he said. In public, with cameras rolling. For Meghan, it was more than a humiliation. It was heartbreak. Witnesses described her in tears. Shocked, trembling, and furious. For someone who had built her identity around the idea of independence, of freedom from royal life, those titles still mattered. They were her bridge to Diana's legacy, her connection to the fairy tale that once captivated the world. And now that bridge was burning in front of her eyes. But to understand how this moment exploded, we need to rewind. The story didn't begin on that fateful day. It started years earlier, in the aftermath of Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties, a move famously dubbed Megxit. Back then, the family split had been painful but manageable. The Queen, ever the diplomat, allowed Harry and Meghan to retain their Duke and Duchess titles, hoping time would heal the wounds. Didn't. Over the next few years, the couple's decisions, high-profile interviews, public statements, and personal revelations chipped away at the fragile trust between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family. Each new revelation felt like a dagger, and every silence from Buckingham Palace only deepened the tension. But through it all, William said nothing. He watched. He waited. He tried to protect what remained of the monarchy's dignity. Until now, it wasn't one single moment that broke him. It was accumulation, a slow burn that finally became a blaze. Reports suggest it was a comment Meghan made during a recent televised appearance, drawing parallels between her struggles and those of Princess Diana. She allegedly said something that crossed the line in William's eyes, something that made him believe she had not only disrespected his mother's memory, but twisted it for sympathy. The quote that spread online was brutal. "They let her die, just like they tried with me." Those words hit William like a thunderbolt. To him, it wasn't just another media stunt. It was an accusation, a statement that implied his family, his father, perhaps even himself, had stood by while Diana suffered. For a man who has spent his entire adult life trying to protect his mother's legacy, that was the unthinkable. Inside palace corridors, aides described the atmosphere as electric. William, normally composed and measured, was pacing, furious, heartbroken. King Charles reportedly urged calm. "Let it pass," he told him. "Don't feed the fire." But William couldn't. Not this time. He saw it as a matter of honor, not just for Diana, but for the institution itself. He made a decision that night. If the monarchy was going to survive the next generation, it had to draw a line. And Meghan had crossed it. The next morning, when William stepped in front of reporters during an official engagement, no one expected what was coming. He looked serious, distant. The crowd went silent. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate, almost heavy. "The time has come," he said. To protect the integrity of this institution, reporters leaned forward. Phones came out. Cameras zoomed in. Meghan Markle, he continued, is no longer part of the royal family. For a moment, the world froze. No one dared move. No one dared breathe. Then, like an avalanche, the reaction began. Gasps, shouts, flashes. Journalists scrambled to confirm what they'd just heard. Within minutes, news outlets around the globe were broadcasting it live. In Montecito, Meghan reportedly broke down when she saw the footage. Friends say she didn't believe it at first. She thought it had been taken out of context. But when her phone started buzzing with messages, the reality sank in. This wasn't gossip. This was official. Prince William had publicly severed her royal identity. What followed was chaos. Royal advisors scrambled to contain the fallout. Palace spokespeople issued vague statements about ongoing internal discussions. But everyone knew what that meant. The king had been pulled into it. Charles now had to make a choice. Stand by his heir, or risk another royal scandal by defending Meghan. And all of this, playing out under the relentless spotlight of the global press, turned into a full-blown constitutional crisis. The introduction to this story isn't just about a single announcement. It's about the emotional earthquake that followed. You could feel the world dividing in real time. Some hailed William as brave, a leader finally standing up for royal tradition. Others saw him as cold and ruthless, punishing a woman who had already suffered enough. And yet, behind the noise, behind the outrage, there was a deeper truth, a glimpse into the private pain of a family that has never truly healed since Diana's death. William wasn't just acting as the future king. He was acting as a son still haunted by the way his mother's story ended, and desperate not to watch history repeat itself. Meghan, meanwhile, found herself caught between two worlds once again. Too royal for Hollywood, too Hollywood for royalty. She had fought for independence, but in the end, the crown took everything she had left. That's the heart of this story. A prince torn between duty and emotion, a duchess caught between power and pain, and a king forced to choose between his sons as the world watches every move. So, what really pushed Prince William to make that public declaration? Was it truly about protecting the monarchy, or something far more personal? Because if the whispers are true, this wasn't just about titles or protocols. It was about betrayal, about love, about a legacy that one man swore to protect at any cost. And the cost might be his family. It began quietly, the way most royal storms do. Not with explosions, but with whispers, tiny fragments of frustration that had been building for years. By the time Prince William made his final decision, those whispers had become an earthquake shaking the walls of Buckingham Palace. This was the breaking point, the moment when diplomacy gave way to defiance, and silence was replaced by the sound of history cracking open. For months, there had been signs that things were shifting inside the royal household. Subtle changes in tone, guarded interviews, carefully chosen words that said far more than they appeared to. William had become colder, more withdrawn, his patience thinning in public appearances where questions about his brother and Meghan were unavoidable. Behind closed doors, aides described him as measured, but clearly troubled. They knew he was struggling, not with politics, but with emotion. He had been watching quietly as Meghan's public narrative grew louder, more critical, more confrontational. Each new statement from California seemed to drag the royal family into deeper controversy. But the moment that truly pushed him to his limit was not about politics or press. It was about truth. It came in the form of a televised interview, one that the palace had not been warned about. Meghan sat under bright studio lights, her tone calm but her words sharp. When she drew a comparison between her struggles and Princess Diana's final days, something inside William broke. He wasn't just angry. He was hurt, deeply personally. To him, Diana's memory wasn't a media tool. It was sacred ground. Watching Meghan invoke her mother's name and imply that the royal family had turned its back on both of them was unbearable. The clip went viral within minutes. Social media was flooded with comments, divided as ever. Some praised Meghan for speaking her truth. Others accused her of manipulation. But the real explosion happened behind palace gates. William's private secretary tried to reach him immediately. The phone went unanswered. The next morning, he appeared at Kensington Palace, early, his jaw tight, his tone clipped. "Enough," he said. That one word changed everything. Those who were present during the meeting said they had never seen him like that. Not even after the Oprah interview. Not even after the Netflix series. His usual restraint was gone. He wasn't the careful, media-trained royal anymore. He was a man tired of being painted as the villain in a story he didn't write. He felt as if the family's reputation, the monarchy's dignity, and even his mother's memory were being used as leverage in Meghan's narrative of victimhood. To him, that was unforgivable. For William, the issue was no longer about reconciliation. It was about principle. He had watched the monarchy bend to accommodate modernity, watched his grandmother navigate scandal after scandal with quiet grace. But this was different. The public was losing faith. Younger generations were beginning to question why the monarchy even existed. William knew that if he didn't draw a line, the entire institution might crumble. And so he made up his mind. The crown had to reclaim control of its own story. Meghan could no longer be part of it. He didn't rush the decision. Despite his anger, he wanted to do it right. Strategically, legally, formally. He called a meeting with palace advisors, requesting that King Charles be informed. The king was at Balmoral when he received the message. Reports later claimed that he was visibly shaken. Not because of the decision itself, but because of who was making it. William had always been the calm one, the diplomat. If he was ready to make such a drastic move, then something truly had broken. Inside the palace, the discussion stretched for hours. Lawyers reviewed titles, constitutional advisors weighed historical precedent, and senior courtiers debated how the public would react. But no one could dissuade William. He spoke with quiet conviction, his voice low but firm. "If we let this continue," he said, "we won't have a monarchy left to protect." He wasn't speaking as a son anymore or even as a brother. He was speaking as a future king. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan's team was unaware of the firestorm brewing. She was in Montecito, preparing for a new podcast launch, still glowing from a recent fashion event. The California sun was shining, her children were playing, and the world seemed far away. But in London, storm clouds were gathering. Royal reporters began to notice the unusual movements at Kensington Palace. Meetings scheduled at odd hours, security staff on alert, vehicles coming and going late into the night. Something big was happening. Then came the leak. A trusted journalist, long known for accurate royal scoops, hinted on social media. Sources say a senior royal is preparing a formal declaration regarding the Sussexes' royal status. Within minutes, speculation turned into a media frenzy. William didn't speak to the press. He didn't issue statements. But those close to him say he was unusually calm the morning after the leak. As if he had already made peace with what he had to do. The choice wasn't between good and bad, it was between chaos and order. Between letting the monarchy bleed slowly from public doubt, or cauterizing the wound at once. That evening he met with King Charles privately. The conversation was described as strained, but decisive. Charles, ever the pragmatist, tried to convince his son to consider the optics. He warned that the world would see it as an attack on Meghan, not a defense of the monarchy. But William didn't flinch. "Then let them," he said. "I'm not protecting optics. I'm protecting the crown." Those words hung in the air. Charles reportedly sighed, realizing that the battle was already lost. The decision, whether he approved or not, would go forward. He didn't argue again. The following morning, palace staff began drafting statements, carefully worded, non-committal, the kind of royal phrasing that could mean everything or nothing. But William had no intention of hiding behind ambiguity. He wanted the truth to be heard, directly, publicly, in his own voice. The announcement was planned during a charity event in London. It wasn't supposed to be dramatic, but William knew the cameras would be there, and he knew that the world would be watching. As he stepped up to the podium, he looked calm, almost too calm. The room quieted. You could hear the clicks of cameras, the rustle of reporters leaning forward. Then he spoke. "The crown is not a brand," he began. "It's not a tool for personal advancement or public relations. It is a duty, a promise, and a legacy. And when that legacy is disrespected, we must act." He paused, his voice steady, his eyes fixed on the crowd. "I believe it is time to protect the integrity of this institution. Therefore, moving forward, Meghan Markle is no longer part of the royal family." It was blunt. It was cold. It was final. The room erupted. Gasps, flashes, hurried whispers. Journalists raced to confirm the quote, sending it across the world in seconds. The statement spread like wildfire. Shared, reposted, dissected, debated. Some called it leadership. Others called it cruelty. But no one could deny it was historic. In that moment, William had broken the last unspoken rule of royal conduct. Never make it personal. And yet, that's exactly what made it so powerful. This wasn't just a policy announcement. It was a declaration of war. Meghan, thousands of miles away, was blindsided. Friends later said she watched the clip on her phone. Frozen. She thought it was fake. Then came the second call, confirmation from her staff. It was real. Prince William had publicly denounced her as a royal. Witnesses described her breaking down in tears, whispering, "He can't do that. He can't." But he could. And he had. Within hours, the palace communications team was in crisis mode. King Charles was briefed. Aides were scrambling to manage press inquiries, and lawyers were reviewing constitutional procedures. Could William's words be considered official? Was it symbolic, or was he invoking royal authority? The distinction mattered, and the confusion only made the story explode further. In the days that followed, the world split into factions. Some said William was finally standing up to what they saw as years of provocation. Others accused him of cruelty, of publicly humiliating his sister-in-law for personal vengeance. But those who knew him best said something different. They said this was about protection, about drawing a line so that the next generation, George, Charlotte, and Louis, would inherit something intact. The breaking point had been reached. The man once known for his patience had turned into the defender of the institution. Meghan's tears became the symbol of a royal family at war with itself. And somewhere in the middle of it all stood King Charles, forced to choose between blood and the crown. The world waited for his response. But before he could act, another twist was coming. One that would send shockwaves through the monarchy all over again. The call came late at night. It wasn't scheduled, it wasn't polite, and it wasn't calm. It was the kind of call that carried the weight of generations, the kind of conversation that could shatter a dynasty. Behind closed doors, the palace had become a pressure cooker of emotion and politics. After William's explosive declaration, everything that had been simmering beneath the surface was finally spilling out. The royals, a family that prided itself on restraint, now found themselves on the edge of chaos. Inside Balmoral Castle, King Charles sat in his private study, the glow of a single lamp lighting the stacks of briefings and letters before him. The silence of the Scottish estate, usually comforting, now felt suffocating. Aides had already briefed him about William's public statement. Every headline was the same. Every network was playing that clip of William repeating the words, "Meghan Markle is no longer part of the royal family." Charles had watched it 3 times. Each time his heart sank deeper, not because of the content, but because of the conviction in William's eyes. His eldest son wasn't speaking as a future king that night. He was speaking as a man who had lost faith in his brother's wife, and perhaps in his brother himself. That was what hurt the most. William's actions had sent a message that Charles could no longer ignore. The palace phone lines were flooded, journalists demanding comment, ministers requesting clarity, and public relations staff frantically drafting statements that said nothing while trying to calm everything. But none of it mattered until Charles spoke to his son directly. The king reached for the phone, took a deep breath, and dialed. When William answered, his voice was low, tired, but steady. "Father," he said simply. "William, we need to talk," Charles replied. "Do you understand what you've done?" "I do," William said, "and I don't regret it." Charles leaned back in his chair. You went public without consulting the palace. You know what that means. Every word you said will be treated as royal policy. Maybe it should be, William said, his tone firm. Someone has to take responsibility for what's been happening. We've been silent for too long. Charles hesitated. There was anger in his son's voice, but also something else, resolve. It reminded him of Diana when she had made up her mind about something. This isn't just about her, William, he said carefully. This is about the stability of the monarchy. The country needs unity, not division. There can be no unity when one person keeps tearing at the fabric from the outside, William replied sharply. She's used our name, our image, our history, and she's turned it into her own personal story. We've let her do it. You've let her do it. The king's tone hardened. I will not be spoken to like that. Then start acting like the king you are. He had spent his life watching how impulsive actions could destroy reputations, divide nations, and haunt legacies. My mother taught me one thing, he told his aide. The moment you act in anger, you stop acting in wisdom. Still, he knew he couldn't delay forever. The pressure from inside the palace was intensifying. The British public had begun taking sides as if it were a national sport. Talk radio was flooded with callers, some praising William for defending royal values, others condemning him for cruelty. Hashtags trended and faded, only to be replaced by newer, angrier ones. Every whisper from the palace became front-page news. And in the middle of it all, Meghan's interview continued to dominate global headlines. Her composed demeanor, her emotional pauses, her mention of her children. It had all landed perfectly. American audiences were sympathetic. European tabloids were skeptical. But no one could deny that Meghan had changed the tone of the conversation. What had once been framed as a royal punishment was now being discussed as emotional cruelty. The palace's silence, once seen as noble, now looked like guilt. Then, another twist. A letter, hand-delivered, sealed with the royal crest, arrived at Meghan's Montecito estate. It wasn't public, at least not at first. But within 24 hours, the contents leaked. The letter was said to have come from the king himself. It was formal, direct, and devastating in its simplicity. The circumstances surrounding your continued use of royal titles have created substantial concern within the institution. It is necessary to review your position within the royal framework to ensure alignment with the values of the crown. No threat, no emotion, no accusation. Just the quiet, surgical tone of a monarch reclaiming control. When Meghan read it, she went pale. Harry read it twice before tossing it aside. They've already made up their minds, he said bitterly. This isn't a review, it's a verdict. That night, Meghan sat alone in her study, the letter in her hands. She thought back to the day she first became a duchess, the smiling faces, the cheers, the weight of the tiara. She had believed then that she could bring change, that she could make the monarchy modern, compassionate, human. And now it was all unraveling. She called her mother Doria. They're trying to erase me, she said softly. No one can erase who you are, Doria replied. Titles don't define you. Character does. But Meghan knew it wasn't that simple. Titles weren't just symbols, they were power. They were the link between her story and the global fascination that kept her brand alive. Losing them wouldn't just be emotional. It would be catastrophic. Meanwhile, in London, William was resolute. Every day that passed without a decision from the king made him more determined. To him, the issue wasn't personal anymore, it was existential. The monarchy's reputation was bleeding, and he believed the only way to stop it was through decisive action. He met privately with his father once more. The tension between them had never been higher. Charles opened the conversation carefully. William, I understand your passion, but you must see the danger in this. Once we strip titles, there is no return. William stood by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. Father, we can't keep pretending nothing's wrong. Every headline, every interview, it chips away at us. We have to show the world that the crown means something. The crown means restraint, Charles countered. It means grace under fire. You think this makes you strong, but it makes us look brittle. William's voice sharpened. It's not brittle to defend the institution Mother died protecting. That stopped Charles cold. He knew that invoking Diana was no accident. It was a weapon, one wielded with precision. William's words were more than just anger. They were legacy. The silence between them was long and heavy. Finally, Charles said quietly, "You want me to make a public example of your brother's wife." "I want you to make a stand," William replied. "For the monarchy. For the future." The meeting ended without resolution, but the die was already cast. Charles ordered the review to proceed formally. The royal household issued a statement that afternoon confirming ongoing discussions regarding the Duchess of Sussex's titles and roles within the royal framework. It was diplomatic language, but everyone knew what it meant. The response was immediate and explosive. News outlets treated it as confirmation that Meghan would be stripped of her royal status. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered, some cheering, others protesting. In California, paparazzi swarmed Meghan's home. Helicopters buzzed overhead. The quiet streets of Montecito became the center of the world's attention. And through it all, Meghan stayed silent. The silence was strategic. Every expert on her PR team advised her not to speak. Not yet. Let the palace move first. Let them make it official. Then, they could launch a full-scale media offensive, portraying her as the woman wronged by a family that had never truly accepted her. Back in London, William wasn't celebrating. He wasn't gloating. He was simply waiting. For him, this wasn't about victory, it was about necessity. He believed that for the monarchy to survive another generation, it needed to stand firm, even if it meant alienating half the world. But even he couldn't predict what would come next. Because when the palace's internal memo leaked, a document outlining the potential removal of not just Meghan's title, but also certain privileges tied to Harry, the storm reached a new level. For the first time, the decision wasn't just about Meghan anymore. It was about the Sussexes as a whole. Harry's anger boiled over. Sources close to him described shouting, pacing, disbelief. "He's punishing me," Harry reportedly said. "He wants to erase us both." And as that fury grew, so did the danger. The feud was no longer a media spectacle. It was a royal war, one that threatened to destroy everything both brothers had inherited. By the time night fell, Buckingham Palace was surrounded by flashing cameras. The air was thick with anticipation. The world was waiting for one thing, the king's final decision. Inside his study, Charles sat alone with a single document before him. The formal declaration. All it needed was his signature. He picked up the pen. Then, for a long moment, he didn't move. His hand trembled slightly. His reflection stared back at him in the window. His own face superimposed against the gray London sky. "Duty," he whispered to himself, "or family?" It was the same question every monarch faced. The same question that had haunted his mother, his grandfather, and now him. But this time there was no easy answer. The rain tapped gently against the glass as he lowered the pen and signed. The ink was barely dry when the news broke. Within hours of King Charles signing the document, the world knew. It was as though every newsroom on Earth had been waiting for the signal. Every journalist already perched on the edge of their seat. The BBC was first to confirm it, then Sky News, then CNN, then every tabloid from London to Los Angeles. The headlines hit like thunder. King Charles strips Meghan of all royal titles. The Palace X. Monarchy reasserts control. By noon, Buckingham Palace gates were surrounded by hundreds of reporters and curious onlookers. The Royal Press Office, which had tried to contain the leaks for days, finally released the official statement. The language was deliberate, restrained, but unmistakably final. By order of His Majesty the King and following extensive review, the Duchess of Sussex will no longer hold or exercise any royal titles, privileges, or patronages associated with the crown. The decision reflects the ongoing commitment of the monarchy to uphold the integrity, neutrality, and values of the institution. No apology, no compassion, just finality. Across the world, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Royal supporters in Britain flooded social media with messages of praise, calling it a necessary decision and a defense of royal dignity. Others called it cruel, vindictive, unnecessary. Protesters gathered outside palace gates holding signs that read, "Leave Meghan alone," and "The monarchy is heartless." The division was absolute. In Montecito, the atmosphere was entirely different. Meghan's home had become the epicenter of global attention once again. Paparazzi cars lined the quiet California streets. Neighbors were furious, reporters relentless. Helicopters hovered overhead, their camera lenses trained on the mansion's tall gates. Inside, Meghan sat in stunned silence as her team read the statement aloud. She had expected it, maybe even prepared herself for it, but hearing it out loud felt different. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was fact. The words "will no longer hold or exercise any royal titles" echoed in her mind like a bell she couldn't unhear. Harry walked in, his phone still in his hand, his face pale. "It's everywhere," he said simply. "Every channel." Meghan nodded but didn't speak. For a moment, neither of them did. The silence between them was heavy. Finally, Meghan whispered, "He actually signed it." Harry sank into a chair, hands running through his hair. I told him this would happen if we didn't stay quiet. But no, William had to make it public." He forced father's hand. Meghan turned to him, her eyes glassy. "It's not just William," she said. "It's all of them." Her voice trembled as she continued. "They never wanted me there. Not really. Not from the beginning." Harry's jaw clenched, his anger rising. "Then we show them who we are without them," he said. "No titles, no palace, just us." But Meghan didn't answer. She was staring down at the statement on her phone screen, scrolling slowly, her expression unreadable. There was no mention of her by name. No acknowledgement of her service, her charity work, her patronages. Just the Duchess of Sussex. A title she no longer had. That was what broke her. The impersonal cruelty of it. Later that evening, her spokesperson issued a response. Measured, professional, and cold. The Duchess of Sussex remains deeply committed to the causes she has always supported. Her focus has never been on titles, but on making meaningful change in the world. But behind the scenes, the tone was very different. Meghan was devastated. Friends said she cried quietly that night, not out of shock, but out of exhaustion. It wasn't just the loss of titles, it was the loss of belonging. The final proof that the family she had once married into had officially erased her. Meanwhile, in London, the palace was trying to project calm. The king cancelled his public appearances for the next 2 days. Officially, it was due to private reflection. Unofficially, it was damage control. Charles knew the storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. William, on the other hand, was resolute. His team advised him to lay low, to avoid making statements, but he refused to hide. He appeared the next morning at a veterans' charity event, his first public appearance since the announcement. Reporters shouted questions as he walked in. "Do you regret your decision, sir? Was it your idea or the king's? Have you spoken to your brother?" William ignored them all. His expression was calm, controlled, unreadable. But inside he was conflicted. He hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. He thought there would be more discussion, more hesitation. When he heard that his father had signed the document, a strange mixture of relief and guilt settled over him. Later that evening, he met with his advisors. "You've done what needed to be done," one of them said. "The public respects strength. You've preserved the monarchy." William nodded slowly but didn't speak. He knew that was only half true. He had preserved the monarchy, but at the cost of his brother. That night his phone rang. It was Harry. For a long moment William stared at the screen. Then he answered. "What do you want?" William said, his tone flat. There was silence on the other end. Then Harry's voice, low and heavy. "You didn't have to go this far." "You made me," William replied. "You both did." Harry's voice rose. "You think this is leadership? Humiliating my wife in front of the world?" "I think this is protection," William said. "For the institution, for the legacy, for everything Mother built. Mother, Harry said bitterly. You think she'd be proud of this? William's silence was answer enough. Harry continued, his voice shaking. You've lost me, Will. Whatever's left of this family, you've destroyed it. Then he hung up. William set the phone down and sat back, staring into the dark. He didn't move for a long time. For all the firmness of his convictions, for all his talk of duty, he couldn't shake the echo of his brother's words. In California, Harry sat outside on the patio, the Pacific wind cutting through the night air. Meghan joined him quietly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Did he say anything? She asked. Nothing that matters, Harry said. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. The glow of camera lights still flickered in the distance, a reminder that their lives were never really private. Back in London, inside the palace, King Charles looked out from his study window. The courtyard below was dark and still. He had done what his duty required, but it didn't feel like victory. Felt like loss. A quiet, heavy loss that clung to him like fog. He turned from the window and muttered to himself, "History will not forgive this." And in that moment it became clear. This wasn't the end of a scandal. It was the beginning of something far greater, a permanent fracture in the royal family, one that no statement, no signature, no ceremony could ever repair. The following morning, the world woke to chaos. Every television channel, every front page, every social feed was consumed by the same story. The monarchy had just rewritten its own history. The air in London felt heavier. Even the rain that drizzled across the city seemed to carry tension. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace before sunrise, holding umbrellas and smartphones, waiting for any sign of life from behind the black and gold gates. Reporters, exhausted but relentless, delivered breathless updates every few minutes. The decision had split the country in half. On one side were those who applauded the king's firmness, calling it a necessary act of preservation. They said the monarchy had tolerated too much for too long, that the endless controversies surrounding Meghan and Harry had drained the institution's dignity. On the other side were those who called the move cruel, vindictive, and outdated. A monarchy afraid of modern women, one commentator said on live television. Another compared it to public exile dressed up as protocol. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was no better. Senior staff moved through the halls in near silence, faces drawn tight. Some refused to make eye contact. Others whispered quietly in corners, unsure of where their loyalties should lie. For all the outward discipline, everyone knew the truth: the family was broken. King Charles sat alone in the white drawing room, the statement from the previous day folded neatly on the table before him. He'd read it a dozen times, though he didn't need to. The words were already carved into his mind. It was the right thing for the crown, yes, but was it right for the family? For the sons he loved in such different ways? When the door opened, it was Camilla who stepped in. She didn't speak immediately, only poured 2 cups of tea and set one in front of him. "You look dreadful," she said finally. Charles gave a faint smile. "Do I?" "You do." She sat opposite him. "You've made the decision. Don't torture yourself by reliving it." He sighed. "It's not the decision itself that haunts me. It's what comes next. William thinks this will end the debate. It won't. It will only make the lines deeper." Camilla stirred her tea slowly. "He's not wrong to defend the monarchy, Charles. But you're not wrong to regret it either. That's the curse of this family. We're always right and wrong at the same time." Charles looked at her with tired eyes. "And what about Harry?" Camilla hesitated. "He'll lash out. You know he will. But eventually, he'll tire of fighting ghosts." Charles nodded but didn't believe it. Harry wasn't like that. He had inherited Diana's heart, the fierce, restless one that couldn't accept silence as virtue. And now that heart had been wounded beyond repair. Across the ocean, the storm was already brewing. The California morning sun had barely risen when Harry and Meghan's team began organizing a response. Journalists were calling nonstop. PR strategists wanted direction. But Meghan wasn't ready to speak. She hadn't slept. She sat by the window, watching the mist drift over the Santa Barbara Hills, the royal statement still open on her phone screen. When Harry entered the room, she didn't turn to look at him. "They did it," she said quietly. He nodded. "Yes, they erased me." He came closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They can't erase you. They can't erase what we've built." She looked up at him. "They already have. Every headline, every photograph, every charity appearance. It all had that title next to my name, the Duchess of Sussex. And now it's gone. Just like that." Harry clenched his fists. "Then we'll take what they took and make it ours. Our name, our story, not theirs." His words were strong, but his voice cracked at the edges. He was angry, but underneath the anger was heartbreak. No matter how much he distanced himself from the institution, it was still his blood, his history. And now, by extension, it was his wife's humiliation. The phone rang again. Their spokesperson was calling for approval to release a prepared statement. Meghan reached for the device, read the draft silently, and shook her head. "No," she said. "Not yet. Let them talk. Let them expose who they really are." It was a strategy of silence, one she had learned from the very family that rejected her. Back in Britain, William was in Windsor for an engagement when the King's statement was officially broadcast across all networks. The moment the words appeared on screen, the crowd erupted in flashes of cameras. As he stepped out of his car, journalists shouted questions at him from every direction. "Your Royal Highness, is this the end of the Sussex titles? Do you think the public will see this as punishment? Have you spoken to Harry since the King's decision?" He ignored them all, keeping his head high, his expression unreadable. But inside the palace, something else was happening. Something quieter, more personal. William received a letter from his brother. It wasn't long, just a few handwritten lines. "You've got what you wanted," it said. "The titles, the order, the silence. But don't mistake silence for peace. You've protected the institution, but you've lost your family. I hope it was worth it." There was no signature, just a single initial H. William read it twice before folding it and placing it in a drawer. He didn't respond. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe he didn't want to. King Charles, meanwhile, found himself waking up each night to the same thought. Had he just secured the monarchy, or doomed it? He had acted out of duty, but he couldn't ignore the hollow ache that lingered afterward. He'd been a father making a king's decision, and the two roles could never coexist peacefully. Weeks later, during a quiet Sunday service at Windsor, Charles stood beside William, the choir's voices echoing softly through the chapel. From the outside, they looked composed, regal, resolute. But beneath that image were two men, one carrying the guilt of action, the other carrying the burden of conviction. When the final hymn ended, Charles turned to his son and said quietly, "We've saved the crown." William nodded, his voice low. "And lost the family." Neither said anything more. The words were enough. Outside, the cameras waited. The world wanted another statement, another glimpse, another headline. But the royal family had already spoken, not through press releases or interviews, but through actions that could never be undone. The weeks that followed were a tense limbo, a world caught between shock, outrage, and fascination. London's streets had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but inside the royal household, nothing was normal. Every corridor, every office, every private chamber carried the echo of William's declaration and Charles's signed document. The monarchy's machinery continued to function, as it always did, but it moved with a new weight, a gravity born of fracture. In Montecito, Meghan and Harry began the painstaking process of recalibration. Public appearances were minimized, media statements carefully curated. They had lost royal titles, yes, but they had not lost their platform. Meghan's team had crafted a plan. She would slowly reclaim her narrative, one public engagement at a time, highlighting her humanitarian work, her advocacy, and her ongoing commitment to causes she had championed as Duchess of Sussex. Every photo, every appearance was calculated not for attention but for restoration of reputation. Harry, still simmering with anger, met with advisors to evaluate legal options. While they knew the king's decision was final, questions remained. Could certain privileges, incomes, or charitable titles be contested? The legal review consumed him, but underneath it all, there was a larger, more personal challenge. How to preserve his family's dignity in a world that was determined to see them either humiliated or exploited. Meanwhile, in London, William's days were a continuous loop of public duties. He attended charity events, presided over ceremonial functions, and maintained the stoic calm expected of a future monarch. On the surface, he was unshakable. Behind closed doors, however, the pressure was immense. Each handshake, each photo, each media appearance carried the weight of judgment. Not only from the world but from the family he had just publicly wounded. The global media had caught onto a new narrative. The royal family was in civil war. Analysts debated endlessly about the future of the monarchy. Political commentators in Parliament began cautiously questioning whether such internal disputes could affect the crown's neutrality and public trust. Royal historians were consulted for context, drawing parallels to Edward VIII's abdication and Princess Diana's media battles. Each comparison highlighted one immutable truth. Personal conflict and public image had always been a delicate, sometimes explosive, balance in the monarchy. As the tension continued to rise, William convened a private meeting with senior palace advisors. The objective was clear: stabilize public opinion and control the narrative. The discussion focused on messaging, media strategy, and long-term plans for the future of the crown. Every word was scrutinized, every phrasing considered. William understood that one misstep could undo everything, both for the monarchy and for his own legacy. In parallel, King Charles worked behind the scenes to maintain diplomatic relationships within the Commonwealth. Calls to governors, ministers, and representatives emphasized the continuity and integrity of the institution. Yet, even as he projected calm authority, the king was acutely aware that his own family had been publicly fractured. This was not just a PR issue, it was a personal and constitutional dilemma. Across the Atlantic, Meghan's strategy unfolded gradually but deliberately. Her first public statement after the removal of titles was short, poignant, and carefully composed. It avoided direct confrontation but emphasized values she considered core: compassion, service, and resilience. The response was immediate. Public sympathy shifted strongly in her favor. Across social media, millions praised her dignity, framing the monarchy's decision as unnecessarily harsh. News outlets analyzed her statements in depth, debating tone, intent, and implication. The global audience was divided, but one fact was indisputable: Meghan had regained a measure of control over her own narrative. Harry, witnessing this shift, felt a complicated mix of relief and frustration. Relief that the public conversation now centered on Meghan's agency rather than the crown's power. Frustration that the palace's unilateral actions had forced their hand, compelling them to defend themselves in ways they might not have otherwise chosen. Yet the couple remained steadfast. Titles had been stripped, privileges revoked, but they were not powerless. Back in London, William observed the reactions with a calculated detachment. Support for his actions among British citizens remained high, particularly among older generations who valued duty and tradition. However, he could not ignore the increasingly hostile coverage in international media. The images of Meghan and Harry standing together, calm yet defiant, were now iconic. They symbolized a form of resistance that even the monarchy could not easily quell. Privately, William met with his father, Charles, once more. Their conversation was subdued, measured, and devoid of confrontation. "The institution is secure," William began. "The titles have been removed, and the message has been sent. Yet I can't help but feel the family is fractured beyond repair." Charles nodded solemnly. "I know. This was necessary, yes, but families endure differently than institutions. I fear we've prioritized duty over unity." William's eyes met his father's. Sometimes duty demands sacrifice, even when it's personal. Their conversation ended quietly, without resolution, but with mutual understanding. Both men knew the consequences of their actions would reverberate for decades. The monarchy had been preserved, yes, but the family, the sons, the brothers, would carry the scars of this moment forever. Across the globe, the story continued to unfold. Every public engagement, every press release, every social media post was scrutinized for its implications. For Meghan and Harry, every move was now symbolic. For William and Charles, every day was a test of leadership, diplomacy, and resilience. And in the midst of it all, a single truth remained. The monarchy had survived, but at a cost that no headline could fully capture. Titles had been stripped, privileges revoked. Yet the human consequences, betrayal, heartbreak, and fractured family bonds, were indelible. In the weeks that followed, the tension between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family escalated into a quiet, simmering conflict that no one could ignore. The removal of Meghan's royal titles had sent a shockwave through both the media and the public, but the deeper battles were now internal, psychological, emotional, and profoundly personal. In Montecito, Meghan and Harry began to strategize their next moves with meticulous care. Meghan's team focused on media appearances that emphasized her work with charitable foundations and her advocacy for mental health, women's rights, and children's welfare. Each interview, each statement, was designed to demonstrate resilience and continuity of purpose. Her loss of titles, while significant symbolically, could not erase the decades of influence she had built, nor the global platform she still commanded. Harry, however, struggled privately. Friends reported that he was consumed with anger, a mix of frustration at William's decisiveness and grief for the apparent dissolution of family bonds. He spent hours on phone calls with aides, lawyers, and trusted confidants, exploring whether there were any legal avenues to contest the king's decision. But all options pointed back to one immutable fact: the crown's authority was absolute in this matter. There was no precedent for reversing such an action without inviting constitutional and political chaos. Meanwhile, in London, William continued his public engagements with the same stoicism and precision that had defined him since the announcement. Every handshake, every ribbon-cutting, every photo opportunity carried layers of significance. He projected calm and authority, signaling to the public that the monarchy remained intact, dignified, and capable of decisive action. Yet those closest to him noticed a subtle tension, a shadow behind his otherwise composed exterior. His eyes betrayed a complex mixture of relief and remorse. Duty had been served, but personal costs were unavoidable. Inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles faced a dual challenge. Publicly, he had to project neutrality, fairness, and measured authority. Privately, he grappled with the fracture that now existed within his own family. Advisors continued to counsel caution, reminding him that the world was watching every word, every movement. Every misstep could inflame international scrutiny and potentially weaken the monarchy's position. The public's reaction was divided along generational and geographic lines. In the United Kingdom, older demographics largely supported William's stance, seeing it as a defense of tradition and the integrity of the monarchy. Younger audiences and international observers, however, were more sympathetic toward Meghan, viewing the removal of titles as unnecessarily harsh and indicative of an institution struggling to adapt to modern expectations. Social media amplified every nuance, spreading interpretations, memes, and debates at lightning speed. Meghan and Harry's legal and media teams coordinated their response to maximize impact. They carefully timed interviews, press statements, and charitable announcements to maintain public visibility while simultaneously emphasizing dignity and focus. The strategy worked. Global coverage shifted from scandal to narrative control. Meghan, once again, became the face of resilience and principle, a counterweight to the monarchy's assertion of authority. Back in London, William faced the delicate task of balancing public perception with internal family dynamics. His advisors recommended minimal commentary, emphasizing the importance of letting the king's official statement speak for itself. Every journalist who attempted to probe for emotion or explanation was met with silence. William understood the optics. Any additional words risked misinterpretation, potentially turning him into the antagonist in the global narrative. King Charles, however, remained unsettled. Despite the apparent success of William's decisive action in reinforcing the monarchy's authority, he could not ignore the long-term implications. The fracture between his sons had deepened, and the public perception of a divided family risked overshadowing the very message the crown sought to send. In private meetings, Charles often reflected on the parallels to his mother's experiences, the delicate balance of duty, family, and public expectation. The weight of history pressed heavily upon him. Across the Atlantic, Meghan and Harry adjusted to their new reality. Losing royal titles meant a loss of formal privileges, but it also freed them from constraints, allowing them to operate with autonomy. They intensified their philanthropic work, scheduled speaking engagements, and strategically managed their media presence. Their objective was clear: to demonstrate influence and relevance independent of the monarchy. Despite the tension, there were moments of reflection. Meghan often spent time alone in the garden, contemplating the surreal nature of her experience, the sudden removal of her official identity and the global attention that accompanied it. Harry, similarly, wrestled with feelings of frustration and helplessness, acknowledging that the legal and procedural framework of the monarchy left little room for contestation. In London, the media continued to cover every development, dissecting William's appearances, Charles's briefings, and the implications of the title's removal. Analysts debated the broader consequences for the monarchy, questioning whether such a public familial rift could undermine the crown's authority in the long term. Even as support for the decision remained high among certain demographics, international commentary highlighted the perception of a monarchy struggling with modernization and familial loyalty. Through it all, the Sussexes and the crown operated on parallel tracks, two entities bound by history and blood, yet now profoundly separated by formal authority, public perception, and personal grievance. The monarchy had acted decisively to assert institutional control, but in doing so, it had intensified the personal and global conflicts that would define the coming months. By the end of the month, the world had accepted a new reality. Meghan Markle was no longer a royal. Harry had lost the formal association of his wife's titles. William and Charles had reinforced the authority of the monarchy, but at the price of visible familial fracture. And the global audience, ever fascinated by royalty and scandal, remained captivated, watching closely as the story unfolded in real time. The months that followed became a study in contrasts, two worlds moving simultaneously, each bound by blood yet divided by circumstance. In Montecito, Meghan and Harry settled into a rhythm that was both deliberate and defensive. Without royal titles to constrain them, they could craft a life that merged visibility with autonomy. Meghan threw herself into charitable work, championing causes she had supported as Duchess of Sussex, while expanding her platform to address mental health, women's rights, and educational initiatives. Each public appearance was carefully orchestrated to highlight purpose, compassion, and agency, rather than fame or grievance. Harry, meanwhile, navigated the storm from multiple fronts. Beyond personal anguish over family estrangement, he faced the logistical realities of the couple's finances, legal responsibilities, and media scrutiny. Advisors worked to manage narratives, draft statements, and plan appearances in a way that would sustain their public relevance while avoiding provocation. But Harry's personal sense of injustice remained raw. Friends reported late-night phone calls filled with frustration, anger, and disbelief at how William and Charles had acted, publicly, decisively, and without consultation. Back in London, William's days were a careful choreography of visibility, duty, and restraint. Each engagement, whether attending a charity gala, presenting an award, or visiting a veterans facility, was under intense scrutiny. The public observed his every gesture, measured his expressions, and debated his motivations. Advisors warned that any lapse could reignite criticism, but William maintained a composed exterior, driven by conviction that his actions were necessary for the monarchy's preservation. King Charles, for his part, continued to navigate the delicate balance between authority and family. Officially, he maintained neutrality, emphasizing the need for institutional integrity and adherence to constitutional principles. Privately, however, he wrestled with the emotional toll of the rift between his sons. He spent quiet evenings in reflection, considering the precedent set by his own mother's reign, and the ways in which personal grief had historically intersected with royal duty. Public reaction remained polarized. In Britain, older demographics largely continued to support William's decisive actions, viewing them as the defense of tradition and duty. Internationally, particularly in the United States, sentiment increasingly favored Meghan, casting her as a figure of resilience and injustice. Social media became a battleground where narratives clashed, with hashtags and viral commentary amplifying every nuance. Analysts dissected interviews, gestures, and public statements, feeding an insatiable global appetite for royal drama. The palace communications team worked tirelessly to control the narrative. Press releases emphasized the continuity of the monarchy, its commitment to neutrality, and the necessity of actions taken. Historical precedents were cited to contextualize the decision, drawing on examples such as Edward VIII and Princess Diana. Despite these efforts, the optics remained complicated. The monarchy's authority was reinforced, but the human cost, a fractured family, publicized anguish, and global debate, was inescapable. Within this context, Meghan and Harry began to adapt their strategy. They prioritized controlled visibility, engaging in projects that were meaningful and newsworthy while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. They leveraged their platform to highlight humanitarian initiatives, strategically shaping the conversation around their contributions rather than the loss of royal status. Media consultants advised careful timing of announcements to maximize impact and public sympathy. In London, William faced a parallel challenge. His position required demonstrating leadership, maintaining institutional authority, and projecting unity despite underlying familial tension. Each public appearance and statement had to balance firmness with dignity. Advisors cautioned against appearing detached or overly punitive, recognizing the risk that public perception could shift if the narrative seemed driven by personal animosity rather than principle. Throughout this period, King Charles monitored developments closely, aware that the monarchy's reputation rested on both perception and precedent. His decisions were deliberate, grounded in legal frameworks and institutional considerations, but tempered by the personal anguish of seeing his sons divided. Advisors debated whether further public statements were necessary, and whether additional interventions could mitigate the fallout. By mid-year, the global narrative had stabilized into a complex pattern. The monarchy remained intact, William's authority reinforced, but public fascination with Meghan and Harry persisted. International media continued to cover every development, every engagement, and every nuanced interaction, emphasizing the human drama behind institutional decisions. The dynamic between the two branches of the family became emblematic of broader tensions: tradition versus modernity, duty versus personal autonomy, public perception versus private grief.